And now Henry V, we've kind of talked about this, but if you can talk about this very specific incident, because I think it sets up perfectly where you talk about Henry V knows how important things need to look and sound and have to happen. So the incident with John Badby, man who decides he thinks something that everyone else doesn't think. Back in these days, that's a horrible thing to do when it comes to religion. Can you talk about this scene where John is about to have a really bad day, and how does Henry orchestrate that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an amazing story. During the time that Henry is Prince of Wales. So his father is on the throne, but his father is increasingly afflicted by illness, by disease. So Henry's really the sort of driving force in English politics and effectively the regent of the kingdom at this time. The religious situation in England during the beginning of the 15th century, so we're in year 1410 now. The religious situation in England at this time is you've got a small but growing movement known as Lollardy. This is a pejorative term the Lollard is a pejorative term given to followers of the teachings of the radical Oxford theologian John Wycliffe, who'd been under the patronage and protection of Henry's grandfather, John of Gaunt, a third son of Edward III. Wycliffe's followers, the Lollards, so-called, you can see them in a way as proto-Protestants. They believed in radical redistribution of church wealth, of personal engagement with scripture. They were very suspicious of what, people like Luther in the 16th century have become very suspicious of, which were practices of the Catholic Church, which didn't seem to be derived from scripture, but only from tradition. Lollardy had lots of roots in the sort of artisan urban classes of England. And in 1410, one such Lollard, a guy called John Badby, a tailor from Evesham, which is sort of in the English Midlands, was burned in a barrel. Now that means he was burned at the stake, but a barrel was to be placed around him to concentrate the flames upon him. He was being burned as a heretic. Now Badby had been in prison for ages and had been given multiple chances to recant, but he refused to do so. And in fact, every time he was brought out to recant, he would sort of double down on his heresies. The political backstory to him being burned, because burnings at this point were not commonplace for Lollards or indeed heretics in general. But there had been a movement in Parliament by a group of Lollards to force through a bill that would take away a lot of church land and use it to re-endow the crown and the country and the universities with massive amounts of wealth that would plug a hole in the budget, if you like. That had been sort of slapped down in Parliament, and John Badby is effectively the scapegoat. It's a public symbol that we're not going to put up with this sort of nonsense from the Lollards. Now, Henry, as regent and effectively in charge of his father's government in 1410, takes a leading role in this burning, which is happening, just outside London. And it's a pivotal point in his political development because he is of the younger generation and he's surrounded, he's partially surrounded by Lollards, people like John Oldcastle, a good friend of his, who are sort of openly supportive of the Lollard movement. He's at this point, does he side with this Lollard movement for a sort of radical reconstitution of how English politics and religion works, the youth movement, let's say, or does he stand back and say, I don't want any part of this? And he has this political instinct that he sort of manages to have it both ways. He turns up at Badby's burning, and as Badby's being sort of tied to the stake and the fires are being lit, he steps forward and orders the barrel to be removed, and he offers Badby this chance to recant. He stretches out his hand and he says, if you recant this heresy, all will be forgiven. I'll pay you a pension for the rest of your life, and we can have peace, we can have reconciliation. So he positions himself as a sort of moderate, as somebody who's prepared to deal peaceably with Lollards, and it's symbolic, it's public. It's performative. It's the sort of thing Richard II had been quite good at, this sort of public performance. But Badby refuses. And eventually he's put back on the fire and the barrel is placed over him and up he goes in smoke. And Henry from that point on is able to say, well, look, I gave Lollardy a chance. I gave Lollards a chance to sort of come in and from the cold and to sort of tone down their pitch. They wouldn't take it. So what do you expect me to do? And he's got these sort of instincts more or less all the way through his career. He's very good at putting into single sort of tableau-like public performance quite sophisticated political positions. And he's also very clear and decisive. I mean, I don't think there is any point in his mind where he's going to say, I'm throwing in with the Lollards. He's quite conservative and traditional in his own personal piety, but he's not so stiff-necked or bullheaded that he's just going to say, burn him, and while you're at it, bring in all the other Lollards you can find and burn them. He's got this sort of political flexibility to him.